Hi everybody, welcome to another makeover. This pretty cabinet was part of a big hutch. I have already finished the bottom part. I will link that video in the description. I wanted this piece to be a separate different piece of furniture, but at the same time I wanted to have a possibility to combine those pieces again if needed. So with that in mind, I started working on the piece. And as you can see, that piece was not in a bad shape, but there were definitely some areas needed my attention. And first of all, I wanted to repair some damaged areas of the chipboard on the bottom. So I pulled out those beautiful drawers and I flipped the piece upside down. It's hard to catch in a video, but there is some soft part of the chipboard. The chipboard made out of wood chips and they glued and pressed together with resin. And with the time, because this piece is like 50 years old, the resin kind of dries out and the edges become more fragile. The best solution to fix those soft, fragile areas is the wood hardener. But my local Home Depot, as well as other hardware stores, didn't have it. So I improvised. I used the super glue. I just added some super glue to the soft areas and then I clamped it. And I left it for like half an hour or 45 minutes. You can also use an epoxy glue or a CA glue if you have it on hand. I didn't have any of this, so I used super glue and it worked just fine. And then I patched those areas with some wood filler. I would recommend to use Bondo, but this wood filler works the same way as Bondo, so I used the wood filler. While everything was drying, I took off the back panel. And at this point, I was thinking about painting this cabinet black. Not the whole thing though, but almost the whole thing. I was thinking to paint middle and bottom shelves black, the back panel and the sides of the cabinet. And I was going to keep putting two front planks, two drawers, and the upper shelf. And don't take me wrong, I like wooden furniture. I like restoring pieces. I like not to use paint if I don't have to. But first, I wanted this cabinet to match the Credenza I have refinished in case I was going to sell them as a hutch. And the sides of the cabinet, the upper and the bottom part, they were pretty damaged and there was a cheap veneer. There was one big piece of veneer missing. Of course, I could restore it, but it would take me time. And I do furniture flipping for a living. I always have to think about the price I can sell the piece and if it worth to invest my time into this piece. And to restore this piece completely, I would have to actually take it apart. And I would do that probably if that piece was solid wood, veneered solid wood. But the sides of the cabinet made out of chipboard. And you saw what happened with the chipboard on the bottom. It was soft and damaged, and it happened at the joints where the chipboard was thin. And it was so risky to take it apart because of those joints. Not only on the bottom and the top, but in the middle as well. The shelvings were sitting in the chipboard. And I could spend a lot of time trying to harden up those joints and reassemble the whole cabinet. So I decided not to take this route. And thanks God that was my piece of furniture and I could do whatever I wanted with it. That's why when I was done with some repairs, I scuff sanded the shelves and the back panel with 180 grit sandpaper. But while I was sanding the sides, I discovered that nice wood pattern. It kind of looked like an owl. So I started thinking about changing my mind. Anyways, I was gonna keep the top shelf wooden, so I needed to remove an old finish. And as usual, I tried scraping first, but it didn't really go well because without the back panel, the cabinet itself was kind of unstable. And I was afraid that with me applying some pressure to the cabinet, I would loosen those joints in the chipboard. So I used some chemical stripper. This chemical stripper has a very strong smell, so I was wearing my respirator. But what I like about this stripper, I don't have to wait for like 30 minutes or even 15. By the time I'm done applying the stripper, I can start stripping right away. The finish on the drawers were thin, so I removed it with 120 grit sandpaper. And then I sanded both drawers with 180 and 220 grit. The insides of the drawers needed some sanding as well, so I used 220 to get rid of those pencil marks and some stains. And I sanded those front planks as well with 120, 180 and 220 grit sandpaper. And off camera, I did the same thing to the sides of the cabinet because I changed my mind. I didn't want to paint the whole side. I didn't want to paint over my owl. So yeah, I came up with something different. And you'll see it in a second, right after I'm done sanding the top shelf. Ta-da! I taped the areas I wanted to keep wooden, and don't worry, the big area with an owl is not gonna need to be painted. For the paint, I'm using Fusion Mineral Paint in the color Charcoal. I absolutely love this paint. I love the coverage, and I usually use a roller to paint my pieces, but this time I decided to use just a brush, and I can tell you there is almost no brush strokes. The first coat of this paint could be transparent, which is kind of scary at the beginning. My first time was like, oh my gosh, I probably need to apply 6 coats of this paint, oh no! But the second coat covers it all. But what I kind of don't like in this paint that it's flat, which is good, but it's not smooth flat. Or maybe it's just me and my application. Maybe I do something wrong, I don't know. But with this paint, I always feel like I need to apply the top coat, or at least some wax. And here is the moment of truth, taking off the tape. I have one rule I try to follow: first paint, then stain. I was not gonna stain this piece, but if I was, I would paint it first because something like this could happen. Yes, I am clumsy. And if I stain this piece before, I would have to tape this whole thing, which is kind of time consuming, or I would have to be careful, which is almost impossible. And here it goes, more sanding. I decided to keep the back panel wooden, and oh my god, what a stubborn finish. I started with 120 grit sandpaper and it didn't work, so I lowered grit to 100 and then went with 120 and 180 grit. When I was done, I wiped the sanding dust and then applied some beeswax. The sides of the drawer tops were lighter than the faces, so I applied some very thin stain in the color Early American. For the top coat, I used Black Forest Furniture Monocoat Oil Finish. I was looking for an alternative to Otis oil. Actually, I wanted to try Rubia Monocoat, but I couldn't find it in my area. And one of woodworkers on YouTube recommended this finish, so I tried it and it's good. The coverage is awesome, the same as Otis oil. You need just a little bit and then you rub it into the wood grain. They recommend to use white non-abrasive pad. On the other piece of furniture, I used my orbital sander to rub it in, but with this piece, I decided to try do it by hand. And it seems like orbital sander does a little bit better job than my hands. But with my favorite part, I don't have to buff it off after. I mean like hard buffing with the towel. They recommend to let it penetrate no longer than 10 minutes and then flip your pad and buff off an excess. But I just wipe it off with some paper towel or shop towel and it works perfect. And we're almost at the finish line. I just needed to screw some holes for the legs. I ordered on Amazon mountain place and some legs for this piece, 16 inches legs, mid-century. I actually had legs on hand, but I screwed up because the legs were different lengths and I had to cut 2 of them and then install some bolts in there, and I screwed up the bolt part, so it was easier just to order new legs. And the last touch, the back panel. And we are done. Just let me remind what I started working with, and here is the final result. And please ignore the background, I haven't staged this piece, just filmed the final result for this video. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video. And by the way, there's my next piece on the background.